For hundreds of years, Europeans shared one particular fear. It wasn't the fear of invasion. That had been part of European life since men first shared caves. It wasn't just the fear of defeat either. The thing that kept civilians, soldiers, and sailors alike awake at night was the thought of being captured by the Ottoman Turks. Since before the Ottoman capture of Constantinople, people in Europe, especially southeastern Europe, warned their children to behave. Go to sleep now or the mad Turk will get you. Even before World War I, when Turkey was allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, sergeants told their soldiers to aim for the head when fighting the Turks. The rumor was that Turkish soldiers worked themselves into such a frenzy before battle that even 2 or 3 shots to the body would often not stop them charging. Whether this is true or not is debatable, but the fear of the Ottoman Turks was real. For centuries, the worst thing that European sailors and others feared was being taken alive by the Turks and made a galley slave. The men who powered ships throughout the Mediterranean, chained to benches with virtually no relief until death. Whipping, beating, infection, poor if any food, and being thrown over the side when dead were all a galley slave could look forward to. Chained to the floor on benches soiled with human waste, galley slaves spent the rest of their short lives in utter misery. And when death came, they were chained to the floor of the ship and went down with it. But this was not the worst fate suffered by those who fell into the hands of the Turks. Welcome to a day in history. Today, the massacres of Christians by Ottoman Turks. Before we tell you about the most brutal things done by the Ottoman Turks in their long history, it's important to know that throughout the time we'll be talking about in this video, from 1450 through World War I, Europeans slaughtered, tortured, raped, and imprisoned each other seemingly whenever they could. In the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, the lands of Central Europe tore themselves apart. An estimated 10 million people were killed, tortured, raped, and died of disease. Entire cities were set aflame. Europeans could, and did, behave like animals towards each other, and no one wanted to be captured by the other side. But they had one thing in common. They were all Christian. Some were Catholic, others Orthodox, and after 1517, Protestants. Yes, they often hated each other, but they shared a common background, and, to a degree, a common culture. The Turks were Muslim. The Ottoman Empire was separate from that world. It operated differently. By and large, it behaved differently from European countries. Worse still, it ruled over millions of Christians, from the Balkans in Europe to the Holy Land to parts of North Africa. In 1683, the Turks were stopped from conquering much of Central Europe at the Siege of Vienna. Whenever there was a revolt or political instability within the Ottoman Empire, Christian populations were likely to suffer. Over centuries, dramatic and violent events made the idea of falling into Turkish hands the biggest nightmare in Europe. Today, we look at some of the worst of these events. In the year 1066, history changed forever. William the Conqueror defeated the Saxons at Hastings and altered the trajectory of English, European, and world history. In 1215, English nobles forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, one of the foundational documents of modern democracy. In 1347, the Black Plague arrived in Europe. In 1415, the Battle of Agincourt changed warfare forever. And in 1453, the Ottoman Turks under Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople, the centuries-old capital of what had once been the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire. The last vestige of the Roman Empire fell to the Turks. The center of Eastern Christianity fell. One of Europe's most strategic cities fell. To Europeans, the fall of Constantinople was a disaster of unreal proportions. Many devout Christians believed that the city's fall was a sign that the end times had begun. It was made worse by what happened after the city fell. According to Turkish tradition, the soldiers of the Ottoman army were granted 3 days of freedom to do almost anything they wanted. Limits were only placed when the actions of the soldiers infringed on some Ottoman officers' own looting and killing. Christian churches were looted. The great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, begun by Justinian I in the 6th century, was turned into the mosque it is today. Thousands of men, women, and children were killed. Those who weren't were taken into slavery. Slavery in the Ottoman Empire was abolished, at least legally, in the late 1800s, but continued until the empire fell in 1918. Not only were Ottoman slaves sent to mines, galleys, and other horrors, but over the centuries, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of women and children of both sexes were taken as sexual slaves. The sultans' harems were world famous. People were both horrified and titillated by the stories of the harem. Mozart and others wrote music, and writers wrote poems and books about the harem. Most of those stories did not tell the brutal truth. That truth was that even for the most renowned and well-treated of those in the harem and elsewhere, they did not have a choice. This was doubly true for children. Beautiful women and girls were prized for the price they would fetch. Attractive young boys and teenagers were also taken for the same purpose. And though Islam forbade male homosexuality, it was common and relatively accepted if it was kept quiet. This continued until after World War I, when many Western mores and laws were adopted in the new Republican Turkey. As you can imagine, these were not voluntary life choices, and the trauma inflicted on those children must have been horrible. One of the most interesting things about Ottoman history is that while this horrific behavior was happening, many non-Muslims rose to positions of power within the empire, and they either turned a blind eye or took part themselves. The atrocities carried out in Constantinople, renamed Istanbul by the Turks, were just a drop in the bucket. Throughout the empire, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse of children was common. Worse still, the abuse originated at the top, but was commonplace everywhere the Turks ruled over Christians or non-Muslims. The fall of Constantinople was just a formality. By 1453, the Turks had controlled most of the Balkans for some time. In the 1300s, the Ottomans began the Devshirme system. Devshirme means collecting. In this case, the children being collected were Christian. From time to time, and the lack of a schedule made life even more nerve-wracking for families, Turkish officials, soldiers, or both would arrive in a village or section of town and simply take the children. Pretty girls were often sent to the harem of some local Ottoman official. If they were very beautiful, they were often sent to the Sultan's palace in Istanbul. Boys between 8 and 18 or so were taken and forcibly converted to Islam. Forcibly means just that. Stubborn boys were beaten and often otherwise abused regularly and severely. Many boys were forced into the ranks of the Janissaries, a sort of elite foreign legion loyal only to the Sultan. They were rewarded, feared, and if they survived the many wars and uprisings they took part in, were often regarded as heroes, but were rarely allowed to live among Turks upon retiring. From the 1300s onward, the Ottomans expanded into areas under European control. In many of the Greek and other coastal islands surrounding their empire in the Mediterranean, the rulers were often Venetian or Genoese Italians, two of the most successful economic empires in history, both with highly capable navies through the 1500s. In 1571, the Turks were completing their long invasion of the large island of Cyprus, which lies just to the south of the Turkish mainland. After nearly a year of the Turkish siege of the important port city of Famagusta, the Venetian commander, Admiral Marcantonio Bragadin, realizing the end was near for his starving, disease-ridden garrison, agreed to surrender to the Turks. The terms of the surrender included protection for civilians and the free passage of surrendering Venetian troops. When the survivors surrendered, civilians were killed and sexually assaulted. Churches were looted and burned. And Admiral Bragadin was subjected to the kind of torture we usually only see in horror movies today. Bragadin was beaten and had his nose and ears cut off. The bleeding was likely slowed, if not stopped, by cauterization. In other words, a hot iron was held to his nasal passages and ears and sealed by his own flesh. Of course, in the 1500s, infection rapidly set in. He was kept imprisoned for some time. Occasionally, he would be brought out and humiliated and beaten by Turkish troops. Finally, to send a message of defiance and terror through Europe, Bragadin was flayed, skinned. His skin, really a large bag, was filled with hay, dressed in his uniform, and sent up a pole for a crowd to see. Large pieces of his body were dragged through a cheering crowd of Turkish soldiers and sailors. Foreigners in the crowd, along with others, recorded and reported what happened. Within weeks, Europe was enraged. And while there were many factors that contributed to the defeat of the Great Ottoman Campaign in Europe at the First Siege of Vienna in 1529, Bragadin's death was surely on people's minds, both as a warning for Europe of what Muslim rule would be like for them and as a sort of war cry. Today, the Morea is known as the Peloponnese, the large island that comprises most of modern Greece's southern coast. It is a rugged area crossed by mountains, ravines, and wild rivers. It is also home to Sparta, but it wasn't just the people of Sparta who were tired of Turkish oppression. Most people in the Peloponnese hated the Turks and Turkish rule, and in the first 2 decades of the 1800s, rebellion was in the air. By 1821, the Peloponnese and much of the rest of Greece were ready to throw off Turkish rule, somehow. The Greek War of Independence began in 1821. It was an exceedingly violent conflict. Resentments over the Devshirme, centuries of religious persecution and discrimination, and hundreds of years of other abuses erupted, especially in the Morea. Greeks were not blameless. At Tripolitsa and other towns, Greek fighters massacred Muslims among the small number of Greek converts and killed every Turk they could find. In the city of Tripolitsa, Greek insurgents slaughtered thousands in the streets. Revenge and resentment on both sides made the Greek Civil War especially savage. In response, the Turks unleashed a wave of terror on the people of the Morea. When Greek fighters left an area or were forced out, remaining Christians were killed. Many of them burned alive in their homes or village churches. The Turks said they were restoring order. Most people in Europe, already wary of the Turks, became enraged at every report of Turkish abuses. The worst was yet to come. This is the famous 1824 painting, The Massacre at Chios, by the renowned French painter Eugène Delacroix. Today, it hangs in the Louvre in Paris. It's deceptively large, at nearly 14 feet tall and 11 feet wide. Delacroix did this on purpose and displayed the painting at the famous Paris Salon art exhibit. While tame by today's standards, combined with the news of the massacre itself, the painting shocked those who saw it. The massacre and the painting inspired both European volunteers to fight in the Greek War of Independence, or to fund it. Chios is the 5th largest Greek island, and it lies just a few miles off the Turkish coast. On a sunny day, Turks can see Chios and the Greeks can see Turkey. The Turks took control of Chios from Genoa in 1566. For over 2 centuries, the people of Chios, known either as Chians or Chiotes, lived in relative peace under the Ottoman sultans. Known for their trading and shipbuilding prowess, their fruit, and the unique and popular products made from the resin of the mastic tree. Among all the regions and islands of Greece during Ottoman rule, Chios was the richest. One more thing, Because the Chians brought in the most tax revenue in all of Greece, they were often given privileges and a place of power that many Greeks could not even dream of. The Greek War of Independence began on March 25, 1821, in mainland Greece and the Peloponnese, and spread throughout most of what is today's Greece. But due to their close proximity to Turkey, their relatively privileged and rich positions, and the stability they enjoyed, most Chians did not want to be involved in the war at first. A year after the war began, revolutionaries from the nearby island of Samos landed and began spreading rebellion and sabotage in Chios, encouraging locals to join. A small number did, and a poorly planned and executed uprising began on the island. Within days, the Ottomans, enraged by what they saw as betrayal by the Chiotes, sent about 7,000 troops to the virtually undefended island. When the Turks were done weeks later, somewhere between 20 to 30,000 Chian Greeks were dead. Another 50,000 were taken as slaves. Thousands more fled. 3 months after they landed on the island, the Turks had reduced the island's population by about 25%. The massacre at Chios was reported worldwide, though it took months or even a year to reach some parts of the Western world. Delacroix's painting was displayed for the diplomatic envoys of Europe in Paris, and not only did sympathy for the Christian, freedom-loving Greeks increase, but so did hatred for the Muslim Turks. Piles of money and other aid from Great Britain, France, the United States, and others began to pour in to support the Greeks. Famous poet and truly depraved English scoundrel Lord Byron made Greek freedom his cause and died in Greece helping the cause. Every move the Turks made in Greece seemed wrong. If there's one thing that describes the Greeks of the period and many Greeks now, it's an almost fanatical devotion to their religion and the Greek Orthodox Church. The leader of the Orthodox Church, and not just the Greek variety, was the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, Gregory V. The Ottomans expected Gregory V to issue a condemnation of the Greek uprising, and he did. But many in the Ottoman government suspected that Gregory was secretly supporting it. So they hung him by the gate to his church and offices. They also killed a number of Orthodox priests. Gregory V and his fellow priests were killed on Easter Sunday, for Greeks especially the holiest day of the Christian year. The death of Gregory was another rallying cry for people in Europe and America to support the Greeks. By the way, have you ever noticed the flag of Greece? It was modeled after the American flag. 55 years after the Greeks began their successful revolt against Ottoman rule, while Chios and several other Greek islands still remained under Ottoman control until the end of the First World War, the Bulgarians also rose in rebellion against the Turks. In response, the Turks unleashed a wave of destruction in Bulgaria that claimed tens of thousands of lives. As in Greece, many regular Ottoman units ran amok. But even worse were the Beshi Bazuks, the irregular militia gathered from ne'er-do-wells and criminals from around the empire. Beshi Bazuk or Basbozuk in Turkish means broken or damaged head. Many of the men were criminally insane. In Bulgaria, once a great power in the region, the Beshi Bazuks and Ottoman army burned most everything they could, destroyed centuries-old churches, and killed Bulgarian Orthodox priests wherever they found them. Today, many people around the world are familiar with the Armenian Genocide of 1915 to 17. All that is, except many Turks, whose government refuses to this day to acknowledge what happened. During World War I, the Turks, having to deal with nationalist elements in their territories in the Middle East, the Kurds in what is today southern Turkey, northern Syria, and parts of Iraq, were also concerned that their subjects in Armenia would rise up, especially with Russian help. In response to an uprising that never happened, the Turks forcibly began to relocate millions of ethnic Armenians into the Syrian desert, killing tens of thousands along the way. Lack of food, water, clothing, and sanitation, all forbidden by the Turks with the aim of killing them through neglect. It worked. Historians from around the world put the total dead in the Armenian Genocide at well over 1 million people. One reason a general Armenian uprising was unlikely was that Armenians had begun to organize in reform movements in the late 1800s and were seeking greater autonomy within the Ottoman Empire, not independence. In response to the calls for reform and suspicions of an uprising on the horizon, Sultan Abdul Hamid II ordered his army into ethnically Armenian parts of Turkey. Somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 people lost their lives, and their villages and churches were burned to the ground. Though it had been sick for years, the Ottoman Empire finally died in 1922 with the Treaty of Lausanne. The Republican government that began with Kemal Atatürk has continued Ottoman practices to a great extent, though admittedly not as medieval in its violence as in earlier times. In 1922, most of the millions of ethnic Greeks were pushed out of their homes in Turkey, as part of a tit-for-tat conflict that did not end well for Greece. In the 1980s, the Kurdish PKK movement rose up in southeastern Turkey, in a conflict that had continued on and off, with torture, repression, and ethnic cleansing committed by the Turkish government. Thank you for watching. See you next time.